Please be seated. Well, welcome to St. Matthew's and Worship on the Move. I have to say, the lack of predictability in our setup here, the day-to-day unknowns about what will be available and what won't, and the learning curve for how to provide a worship experience with minimal distractions for all of you has been quite the spiritual discipline. You all signed up for church, and you're getting a wilderness experience. And as for me, well, I can't drive, I can't walk without hobbling, and I'm completely dependent on others to just get through the week. But I'm doing fine, so just put that part out of your mind, okay? But between the building renovation and my foot situation, it feels like we're all searching for a strong, solid place to stand, which oddly enough makes this the perfect day to hear Jesus' parable about two men who went to pray. One who had everything to stand on, and one who had nothing. Turns out, the one with nothing was exactly where he needed to be. So let's look at these two men and what Jesus wants us to see in them. This gospel story introduces us to two character types we have encountered many times in the Gospel of Luke. But I don't want us to fall into the trap of labeling the Pharisee as being bad and the tax collector as good. In the context of the time this parable was written, the Pharisee would have been respected as a wise and competent leader. The tax collector, an untrustworthy foe. The Pharisee isn't wrong for recognizing his devotion to God. He recounts what he has done for God. And Paul does the same thing in the reading we heard from 2 Timothy. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging what we do out of love for God. The problem with the Pharisee's prayer is where his focus lands, on himself, his discipleship, his virtue, his control. The tax collector has also come to the temple, but he stands far off. He doesn't dare even lift his eyes to heaven. He beats his breast in humility and prays only for God to look with mercy on his sins. He brings nothing to God except his need. So which one goes home justified? Now, please don't mistake justified as meaning loved, because both of these men are loved by God. Justified means being in right relationship with God. And what we're going to learn is that some approaches to deepening our relationship with God work better than others. We live in a world which celebrates self-sufficiency and independence. Get a grip. Put on your big boy pants. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? We've all heard these. The Pharisee embodied these characteristics. Yet the text leads us to believe that he went home unjustified. It's the tax collector who has no resume to boast of, no image to maintain, no illusion of control over his life. He is the one who goes home having found a deeper, closer relationship with God. This parable isn't about the virtues of self-sufficiency or humility. It's about where we put our trust. The Pharisee trusts in himself. The tax collector trusts in God's mercy. I've read this parable many times before, always nodding along, thinking I understood it, and I did at one level, but this time something shifted for me. Suddenly, I wasn't just reading about the tax collector, I was living his experience. As I hobble around my home with this broken bone in my foot, I've had to depend on the goodness of others to help me with very basic tasks. Getting groceries, carrying out the recycling, even walking my dog. I've stood up here many times to preach about God's grace. It's another thing to live in a space where you have no choice but to receive it. And let me tell you, it's uncomfortable. Most of us spend our whole lives trying not to be the person who needs help. This place of deep vulnerability, when we are forced to face our limitations, puts us squarely in the place of the tax collector, standing at a distance, unable to lift our eyes, acutely aware of the discomfort of dependency. But it's that discomfort which opens the door to humility and bursts it off its hinges to receive God's mercy. When we hit these points in life, there are choices to be made, not about outcomes or circumstances, but in how we respond. The tax collector beat his breast and prayed for mercy, throwing off all pretense and accepting, even embracing, his dependence on God. I found myself praying for insight. How, in the midst of my disappointment and frustration, how might I find God's redeeming grace? And you know what? God answered. Not with a lightning bolt or a voice from heaven, but in the form of human hands. God's mercy is not abstract. It shows up very concretely. For me, it's been people taking my dog for a walk, meals from my freezer, and countless rides to wherever I want to be. That's how mercy arrives, through neighbors and friends, through ordinary kindness. The Apostle Paul experienced the same thing. Again, in 2 Timothy, he wrote, "The Lord stood by me and gave me strength." God is always standing by and offering us that strength. When we open ourselves in humility, we become able to receive that strength. The tax collector went home feeling accepted and in a loving relationship with God. Not because he worked his way into that relationship, but because he opened himself to receive what was there all along. So here's the question for all of us. Can we live like this all the time? Not just in crisis, but as a way of life. The challenge is not just to acknowledge our need in crisis, but to live as people who know we are always dependent on grace. In fact, we're about to pray this very posture in our Eucharistic prayer today. We will pray, setting our wisdom, our will, our words aside, emptying our hearts and bringing nothing in our hands. We yearn for the healing, the holding, the accepting, the forgiving that your Spirit alone can offer. That prayer describes the life of faith. Open hands, not clenched fists. Receiving, not achieving. Letting our needs become our prayer. And here's the promise. The tax collector went home justified, in right relationship with God, not because he had it all together, but because he opened himself to mercy. That same mercy is here for us in our unfinished business, building in our unfinished lives. God meets us right here with nothing to stand on and says to us, "You are loved, you are forgiven, you are mine."